The wind cut across the valley like a knife, lifting snow into sharp spirals that stung Clara's cheeks. Her wrists burned from the rope, the coarse hemp biting deeper with every stumble her father dragged her through. She kept her eyes low, not daring to look back at the cluster of riders behind them, her father in the lead, two of her brothers flanking, all silent, all grim. Only the horses made sound, their hooves cracking the frozen earth in a rhythm that seemed to count down her life. The cabin came into view at the edge of the tree line, a squat figure against the dark pines. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin and blue, vanishing into the grey sky. She felt her heart lurch. That smoke was not salvation, it was her sentence. She remembered the words spat at her hours earlier in the kitchen, her father's voice low with shame and rage, *, you've ruined us. You'll live out your days with him. *, no explanation, no plea allowed, just the final blow of judgment. Her brothers dismounted first. One pulled her down roughly, and her knees struck the frozen ground so hard she tasted iron in her mouth. She clamped her jaw, swallowing the pain. Pride was the only shield left. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The cabin door opened. A tall figure filled the frame, shoulders broad, hair black with streaks of grey, beard thick against a face carved from years of hard winters. Jonah Kane. The Mountain Man. Rumors of him had haunted tavern talk for years, outlaw, deserter, killer. Mothers used his name to frighten children into obedience. Clara's stomach turned to stone. Her father shoved her forward. "She's yours now," he said, voice flat, as though bartering livestock. "Do what you will. She's no daughter of mine." Jonah's eyes moved to hers. They were pale, an unsettling grey, like ice that refused to thaw. He didn't speak. He simply stepped aside, leaving the door open. The silence was worse than words. Clara's breath quickened. She half expected him to reach for her, to claim her with a violence that matched the cruelty of her father's sentence. Instead, he only watched. His face gave nothing away. The wind tore through her hair, lifting strands across her eyes. She wanted to scream at him, at all of them, but her voice stayed buried beneath the weight of humiliation. Her father turned, mounted his horse, and tugged the reins. Her brothers followed, neither sparing her a final glance. Their departure was swift, almost eager, and soon their figures melted into the swirling snow. The sound of hooves faded until only the wind remained. She stood alone at the threshold of the stranger's home, body trembling from more than cold. Jonah shifted, and the floor creaked under his boots. "Come in," he said finally, voice rough, deep, yet startlingly calm. She hesitated, but the cold bit at her bones, and pride would not keep her warm. She stepped inside. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, leather, and the faint tang of metal. Shadows played across the walls where the fire crackled. A bearskin rug stretched near the hearth, its jaws frozen in a snarl. Weapons leaned against the far wall, rifles, knives, tools, each one speaking of a life lived on the edge. Jonah closed the door behind her. The sound was final, sealing her fate. He walked past her without a glance, set a pot over the flames, and ladled stew into a tin bowl. Steam rose, carrying the scent of venison and herbs. He placed the bowl on the table. "Eat," he said. The single word startled her. She blinked, clutching her arms, unsure if it was command or kindness. Hunger twisted her insides, but pride hissed at her not to obey. She remained standing, chin lifted. Jonah sat in the chair opposite the fire, picked up his own bowl, and began to eat without looking at her. The crack of the fire filled the silence, punctuated only by the scrape of his spoon. Minutes dragged. The heat of the cabin seeped into her skin, thawing the ice, loosening the knot in her chest. Finally, she reached for the bowl, hands shaking. The stew was hot and rich, more food than she had tasted in days. She ate quickly, then slowed, aware he was watching. His gaze was steady, unreadable. When she finally set the bowl down, he said, "You'll need strength up here." The words settled into her like an ember. Not cruelty, not lust, just fact. Yet even that small mercy unraveled something inside her chest, something tight and burning since the night her father's verdict fell. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Why?" she whispered, surprising herself with the question. Jonah tilted his head slightly. "Winter doesn't care who you are. If you want to live, you work. If you don't, you die." The bluntness stung, but beneath it lay a truth she could not ignore. He rose from the chair, moved toward the door, and pulled on a heavy coat. "You'll have time to think. Don't go outside without me." He stepped out, the door closing firmly behind him. Clara stared at the empty room, the flickering fire, the shadows that seemed to breathe. For the first time since her father's punishment began, she felt something unfamiliar, confusion instead of despair, uncertainty instead of fear. He had not touched her. He had not mocked her. He had given her food, warmth, silence. Her hands curled into fists as tears threatened to rise. She hated that she felt relief. She hated that she had expected worse. She hated her father most of all, for making her believe she deserved nothing better. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire snapped. She listened to both until the sound of boots returned. The door opened, snow gusted in, and Jonah carried in an armful of firewood. He set it by the hearth without a word. Clara watched him closely now, searching for the monster the town had promised. She saw only a man, worn and scarred, carrying burdens she could not yet name. He met her gaze once more, and in the silence between them, a question lingered like smoke. What kind of punishment was this, and for whom? The fire flared, shadows deepened, and the night pressed against the walls. Clara pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, heart unsteady, and knew this was only the beginning. The mountains woke her before dawn. A howl echoed through the timber, rolling down the slopes until it rattled the windows of the cabin. Clara pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, pulse quickening, though the sound was already fading into the dark. The fire had burned low, shadows stretching across the room like long black fingers. She sat upright, unsure whether to add wood or wait, then remembered Jonah's armful of logs stacked by the hearth. With trembling hands, she fed the flames, the sparks leaping upward in answer. When the door creaked, she startled. Jonah stepped in, snow dusting his coat, breath steaming in the chill. He carried 2 rabbits tied by their legs, eyes clouded and lifeless. He dropped them on the table without ceremony, then hung his coat on the peg. His eyes slid briefly to hers, then back to his work. "You'll skin one," he said. Clara's lips parted, but no protest came. She had never skinned anything in her life. Still, when he set the knife down beside her, its handle worn smooth from use, she reached for it with stiff fingers. Her hands shook as she pressed blade to fur, the smell sharp, unfamiliar, almost unbearable. She fumbled, cutting clumsily, until Jonah's hand stopped hers. His fingers were rough, steadying hers with a quiet firmness. "Not like that," he muttered. "Here." He guided the motion once, then stepped back. She swallowed hard and forced herself to finish, each slice a battle against nausea. By the time the rabbit lay clean, her stomach roiled, but pride kept her from looking away. Jonah nodded once, neither praise nor scorn, simply acknowledgement. "Good enough." He took the carcass, set it aside, and stoked the fire higher. She sat breathing hard, the knife still warm in her palm. The days settled into rhythm. Chopping wood, hauling water from the stream, mending torn clothes with stiff thread. Each task left her hands raw, nails cracked, arms sore, yet she found a strange clarity in the work. The body hurt, but the mind dulled. At night she collapsed onto the narrow bed in the corner, sleep dragging her into a darkness where her father's face sometimes lingered, twisted in contempt. She would wake with tears crusted on her cheeks, heart racing, until the sound of Jonah moving about the cabin reminded her she was far from home. One evening, after hours of hauling water until her shoulders screamed, she dropped the bucket just short of the door. Water sloshed over her boots. She cursed under her breath, anger breaking through exhaustion. Jonah looked up from where he was sharpening a blade, one eyebrow raised. "What?" she snapped. The word tore free before she could stop it. He studied her a moment, then returned his attention to the knife. The stone scraped against steel, slow and steady. At last he said, "You'll last longer if you don't fight every step." The calmness stung more than anger would have. Clara bit her lip until she tasted blood. "You don't know what it's like," she whispered. The knife paused. Jonah's gaze lifted, holding hers in a silence that pressed heavy against the room. For a moment she thought he might answer, but he only set the blade aside and rose. "Come on," he said. "Storm's coming." They stepped out into the night. Clouds gathered thick over the peaks, wind clawing at their clothes. Jonah showed her how to lash shutters, how to secure the roof against snow, how to stack wood close to the door. They worked side by side until the first flakes drifted down, pale against the dark. By the time the storm broke, the cabin was braced, the fire roaring inside. Clara collapsed near the hearth, limbs trembling, while Jonah leaned back in his chair, silent as ever. Snow hammered the roof through the night. Wind shrieked against the walls. Clara buried her face in the blanket, certain the cabin would split apart. In the small hours, unable to bear the noise, she crept from her bed. Jonah sat awake still, rifle resting against his leg, eyes fixed on the flames. She hesitated, then spoke softly. "Aren't you afraid?" His eyes flicked to her. "Fear doesn't help when the roof caves in." She swallowed, cheeks warming, and returned to bed. But the steadiness of his voice lodged in her chest like a stone, grounding her until sleep finally claimed her. The storm lasted 3 days. When it passed, the world lay buried beneath drifts higher than her shoulders. The work began again. Jonah taught her how to walk snowshoes across the crust, how to split frozen wood without shattering it, how to trap smaller game with loops of wire. He never coddled, never raised his voice, but neither did he strike or belittle. His instructions were sharp, efficient, and oddly patient. Clara learned to watch him closely, to mimic his motions. Her hands toughened, her balance steadied. And with each lesson, her anger thinned. What remained was something she could not name, a flicker of respect, a reluctant trust. Still, the nights pressed hard. She often curled in bed, palm resting against her belly, whispering words she never spoke aloud by day. She wondered if the child could hear the wind, if it felt her fear, if it would grow strong enough to endure this wild place. She wept quietly, hiding her face from the firelight, until once she realized Jonah's shadow lingered longer than usual near the hearth. When she looked up, he turned away without comment, leaving her with food placed by the bedside. The silence between them shifted after that. Not warmer, not softer, but heavier with things unsaid. One afternoon, she tried a joke, muttering about his cooking, burnt bread that tasted like bark. His lips twitched, almost a smile, before he shook his head. Better than starving. Yet the air lightened, just a fraction. It was a fragile piece, soon tested. She went to fetch water, ignoring his warning about the snow still treacherous along the stream. The surface looked solid, white crust glistening beneath a weak sun. She stepped carefully, bucket in hand, and halfway across the bank the ice cracked. Her cry split the stillness as she plunged to her knees, icy water biting into her skin. Jonah's shout cut through the trees. Then he was there, hand clamping her arm, yanking her free with strength that left her breathless. He dragged her back to solid ground, fury burning in his eyes. "You want to die? Then keep wandering off like a fool." The word struck sharper than the cold. Clara sat shivering, water dripping from her skirts, throat closing with shame. She expected him to turn away, leave her to freeze. Instead, he stripped off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, pulling her close to the fire once they returned. His hands worked briskly, setting boots by the hearth, pressing blankets against her. She stared at him, heart hammering, unable to reconcile the anger in his voice with the care in his actions. "Why do you bother?" she whispered, teeth chattering. Jonah paused, met her gaze, and for once his eyes softened. "Because death doesn't play fair," he said. Then he turned away, busying himself with the fire. Clara lay trembling, not only from cold but from the realization that his harshness was not cruelty, but warning. He had not saved her to punish. He had saved her because, against reason, her life mattered here. The fire roared higher, warming the cabin, and for the first time since her father's judgment, she felt a spark of something she had thought lost, hope, fragile yet alive, refusing to die in the storm. The summer sun hung low when the riders appeared, their silhouettes breaking the still horizon where the mountains met the sky. Clara stood in the yard, her hands damp from washing clothes in the basin, and felt her blood run cold. Even from a distance she knew them, the tilt of the hats, the stiff posture of the man leading. Her father. 2 brothers rode at his side, dust rising behind them like smoke from a fire long overdue. She froze, heart pounding against her ribs. Months had passed since the night he abandoned her at Jonah's door, yet the sight of him stripped away every inch of strength she had gathered. She pressed her palms against her rounded belly, the child within stirring as though it sensed the storm rolling near. Jonah stepped out of the cabin, rifle in hand, gaze fixed on the approaching riders. His jaw set like stone, unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed the truth. He had expected this. Perhaps he had even been waiting. The horses slowed as they reached the yard. Her father dismounted first, boots striking the earth with the weight of command. His eyes swept the cabin, then fixed on her, narrowing with disgust. "So it's true," he said, voice low but sharp. "My shame lives still." Clara flinched. The words cut as they always had, but the months in the mountains had hardened her skin. She lifted her chin, though her legs trembled beneath her dress. Jonah moved closer, rifle raised in quiet warning. "You've said your piece. Now turn around." Her father laughed, dry and bitter. You think I rode all this way to leave empty-handed? That girl belongs to me. She'll answer for her sins under my roof. She's not yours, Jonah said. The words carried no heat, only certainty. Her brothers shifted uneasily in their saddles, hands hovering near their weapons. Clara saw the storm gather in her father's eyes, the same storm that had shattered her life once before. He spat on the ground. You're a thief and a fool. Step aside. The air thickened. Clara felt the moment stretch, each heartbeat a drumbeat of fate. Jonah's voice dropped, steady as the mountain itself. You'll not take her. The crack of the first shot shattered the stillness. Her brother's pistol flashed, the bullet splintering wood near Jonah's shoulder. In an instant the yard erupted, guns drawn, shouts rising. Jonah fired back, his shot true, sending one brother tumbling from the saddle with a scream. Horses reared, dust exploded, and Clara stumbled for cover behind the basin. Her father advanced, pistol in hand, eyes burning with wrath. Jonah met him head-on, shots ringing so loud the earth seemed to quake. Clara crouched low, every nerve alight, torn between terror and the desperate urge to stand. Jonah staggered, a bullet grazing his side, crimson blooming through his shirt. Clara cried out, instinct dragging her to her feet. She seized the rifle propped against the cabin wall, fingers shaking so hard she nearly dropped it. The weight was heavy, unfamiliar, but her grip tightened. She raised it, breath ragged, and aimed at the man who had called her worthless. Her father turned, shock flashing across his face at the sight of her with the weapon. For a moment time held its breath. She saw not just the man before her, but years of his cruelty, his silence when she cried as a child, his scorn when she laughed, his fist slamming the table when her mistakes bruised his pride. He had given her away as though she were nothing but cattle. And now he had come to claim what he had thrown aside. Her finger squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared, the recoil jolting through her body. Smoke filled her vision, ears ringing. When it cleared, she saw her father stagger, pistol slipping from his hand. His knees buckled, dust rising as he fell. Silence rushed in after the violence. The second brother spurred his horse, fleeing down the trail, dust vanishing into the horizon. The yard smelled of blood and gunpowder, hot beneath the sun. Clara lowered the rifle, arms trembling, chest heaving. Jonah stood watching her, his wound bleeding but his stance unbroken. His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw pride there, not in himself, but in her. She dropped the weapon, rushing to his side. "You're bleeding," she gasped. "I've had worse," he muttered, though his lips pressed tight with pain. She tore cloth from her skirt, pressing it against his wound, her hands steady now in a way they had never been before. The trembling that shook her body was not fear, but release. She had faced her father and did not break. Jonah's hand caught hers, holding it firm. His voice was hoarse but certain. "You don't belong to him. You never did." Tears spilled, hot and unbidden. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder, the smell of smoke and sweat grounding her. "Then who do I belong to?" she whispered. Jonah hesitated, then lifted her chin gently. His eyes were raw, unguarded, showing the man behind the silence. "To yourself," he said. "But if you'll have me, I'll stand beside you." Her chest ached with something fierce and new. She nodded, unable to speak, and felt his hand steady her as though she had always been meant to stand here, in this wild place, beside him. The sun slid lower, shadows stretching long. Her father's body lay still in the dust, the mountain indifferent to his pride and rage. Clara did not look back. She knew the chapter of her old life had ended with the pull of a trigger. That night, as the fire glowed warm in the cabin, she sat near Jonah, the child within stirring against her ribs. He muttered about the baby crying like a coyote, grumbling in his dry way that sleep would soon be a luxury of the past. Clara laughed, soft and free, the sound startling even herself. She turned toward the fire, eyes reflecting its light, and felt the weight of all she had endured, the shame, the exile, the storms, the violence. Yet beneath it all, something new pulsed steady as the mountain, resilience, unshakable and alive. Her voice rose, quiet but strong. "In the end, my father gave me away as punishment. But here, I found something he never understood. I found myself." The flames crackled, the mountain wind whispered against the walls, and Clara knew her story was only beginning. If this tale moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. The thaw came slowly, the snow loosening its grip on the mountain as streams trickled free and birdsong returned in faint notes. Clara felt the shift in her bones. She had grown leaner, stronger, skin brown from the weak spring sun. Her belly rounded beneath her dress now, the child stirring often, reminding her each day that time pressed forward whether she was ready or not. Jonah said little about it. His glances lingered longer on her form, but never with judgment, never with the hunger she had once feared. His eyes carried something else, recognition, perhaps, that life was taking root in a place meant only for survival. She caught him once, watching her as she rubbed her stomach near the fire. When she met his gaze, he looked away, muttering something about checking the traps. Peace never lasted long in the mountains. One evening, just as the sun bled red over the ridgeline, a crack of distant gunfire split the calm. Jonah froze, rifle already in hand, eyes narrowing toward the trees. Clara's pulse leapt. He motioned for silence and doused the fire until shadows claimed the room. They waited, breath shallow, as boots crunched outside. The door burst inward. 3 men stepped in, faces rough with dirt and hunger, guns glinting in their hands. Their laughter filled the cabin, coarse and triumphant. Clara shrank against the wall, heart hammering, as one of them tilted his hat with a mocking grin. "Heard tell the mountain hermit had himself a woman," he drawled. "Looks like the gossip was right." Jonah stood steady, rifle aimed. His voice was calm, though iron lay beneath. "Leave." The men chuckled, spreading out. One's eyes fixed on Clara, hungry in a way that turned her stomach to stone. Another sneered at Jonah. "A man like you don't deserve a prize like her. We'll take her off your hands." The room erupted before Clara could breathe. Jonah fired first, the crack deafening in the small space. The nearest bandit fell, clutching his chest, blood pooling on the floorboards. The other 2 roared, returning fire. Wood splintered, smoke filled the air, and Clara dropped to her knees, crawling behind the table. The fight was brutal, fast. Jonah moved like a man carved from instinct, ducking low, returning shots with deadly precision. One bandit's scream echoed as he staggered back through the door, hand pressed to his bleeding leg. The third lunged forward, blade flashing in the firelight. They collided, bodies slamming into the wall. Jonah grunted, the knife slicing his arm, but with a savage twist he drove the man down. The struggle ended in silence, broken only by Jonah's harsh breathing. Clara's hands shook as she rose from behind the table. The floor was smeared with blood, the air acrid with gunpowder. Jonah leaned against the wall, blood dripping down his sleeve. His eyes found hers, steady, as though to assure her he still stood. She rushed forward, heart pounding. "You're hurt." "Not dead," he muttered, though his face was pale. She tore cloth from her hem, pressing it against the wound. Her hands trembled, not from fear of him, but from fear of losing him. The realization struck deep. She had come here certain he would destroy her. Now she found herself desperate he might remain alive. Jonah watched her work, eyes softening beneath the weight of pain. "You're steadier than I thought," he murmured. She blinked at him, startled. "I'm shaking." "Still kept me from bleeding out," he said. A faint smile tugged at his lips before exhaustion dragged it away. Through the long night, Clara tended his wound, cleaning, binding, keeping the fire fed. The cabin felt smaller, more fragile, as though danger still lingered outside in the shadows. Each creak of the wind set her nerves on edge, but Jonah's breathing anchored her. She listened to its rhythm until dawn broke pale across the mountains. In the quiet hours, while he dozed, she traced the scars that lined his arm, jagged and countless. They told stories she could not know, battles, betrayals, survival etched into his flesh. For the first time she wondered what had driven him into exile, why a man of such strength lived apart from all others. Perhaps, like her, he had been cast away. When he stirred, she asked the question that had lingered on her tongue for months. "Why do you live out here, alone?" His eyes opened, weary but alert. For a moment, she thought he would dismiss her with silence. Then he spoke, voice low. "Because I was tired of watching men take and take. I left before I became one of them." The words hung heavy, weighted with a truth he would not fully share. Clara held his gaze, heart twisting. She realized then that his solitude was not strength but wound, a wound as deep as the one her father had carved into her life. In the days that followed, as Jonah healed, their bond tightened. She cooked meals with more care, forcing him to rest while she split wood. He, in turn, guided her gently through tasks she had once found impossible, his patience steadier than before. Silence no longer pressed between them like stone. It breathed, alive with unspoken understanding. One evening, as the fire crackled low, Clara spoke the thought she had kept buried. I was told I was worthless. That no man would want me. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. That's why my father gave me away. Jonah set down his cup, eyes hardening. Worthless. He leaned forward, every word deliberate. You've survived storms, hunger, and fear most wouldn't last a week in. You've kept me alive. Don't let a coward's judgment define you. The conviction in his tone broke something inside her. Tears welled before she could stop them. She turned her face away, ashamed of her weakness. But Jonah did not mock or scold. He simply sat close, his presence steady, until her tears ran dry. The fire dimmed, shadows stretching long across the cabin. Outside, the mountain held its breath. Clara felt the weight of Jonah's words echoing inside her chest, louder than the wind, stronger than the fear that had ruled her life. Yet peace was fragile here. She knew the men who had fled would return, perhaps with more. And worse, she felt the shadow of her father's pride reaching even into these mountains. He would not forget, would not forgive. The thought lingered like smoke, curling around her heart. Still, as she lay down that night, she felt Jonah's presence beside the fire, rifle across his knees, and for the first time in months she believed she might not face the coming storms alone.